Welcome to Trekosophy, the Star Trek philosophy podcast. We've got a full house for you tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Introducing our leader extraordinaire. He's got blisters on his fingers. It's Ben McLean.
Yes, well, we're on the verge of becoming more popular than the Beatles.
Nice. And our technical guru, who doesn't actually have to talk computers into blowing themselves up. They just do it when they see him coming. It's Chris McGee.
I just stare at them until they finally give in.
And our chief archivist, who used to live inside a computer, apparently. It's Hillary Muckovitz.
Good evening. I'd have a witty line, but Landrew hasn't told me what to say yet.
Nice. And our published author, the esteemed professor of putrilicitude, the titan of trekosophizing, the wordsmith of the wonders of the universe, it's Brendan Kirby.
How you doing?
And scraping the bottom of the barrel when it comes to witty introductions, I'm Bill Allen, a.k.a. the guy in the red shirt.
Well done.
All right.
And as Hillary was clever enough to actually point out, tonight we're going to be discussing the return of the Archons and Landrew the God Machine.
Oh, spoilers. I'm sorry.
Okay, you know what? Star Trek was closer to the moon landing than anything else we're going to talk about. So if it was that close to the moon, if it was before the moon landing, there's no such thing as spoilers anymore.
Okay. All right.
Except for the fact that it is a key element of the new movie that they have to fight Landrew. He's the bad guy behind everything in Star Trek Into Darkness.
Made up spoiler alert.
Landrew mind controls Khan Noonien Singh and sends him with an army of mutant tribbles to assault the Federation stronghold at Kittimer. And sadly, that's going to end up being a Star Trek plot at some point in one of these movies, and I apologize in advance for doing that to you.
If not, a fan has probably already.
But wait, you forgot the whales.
Oh, I didn't forget them. I still say it's wrong. The reason, you know why whales are going extinct? Because people from the future are going back in time to scoop up whales because they're extinct in the future.
It's not our
That's
fault.
the real reason the population is. Why do you think the bees are disappearing? Everybody's coming back in time to rescue bee colonies. That's why they're disappearing.
It's
Bees
a
aren't
snowball.
dying out. They're disappearing. I mean, look at any of the articles about it. It's the bees disappearing, not the bees dying out. The bees migrating to other climates. The bees are just flat out disappearing, man. It's
Semantics.
time travelers, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, like the Illuminati, the IRS, chemtrails, Baden-Powell, even more words. It's the system, man.
Emus, man. Anyway, no, let's get on with the episode. I could sit there and tell you about the McDonald's emu conspiracy and it'll frighten you, but
Yeah, that's fine.
let's actually deal with Landrew and the return of the Archons.
Indeed. Tonight's topic was chosen by Brandon Kirby, whom we will turn to now to find out why.
Oh, it's on me. Bummer.
It's on you.
I've never done a show intro like this before.
We should make this like an official rule of Trekosophy. If you suggest doing an episode, you're the person who has to take the lead to explain why.
Well,
Like the third rule now or something?
I'll try not to stick up
Maybe we
to it.
should make it one. Do you guys think so? I mean, it seems too obvious to be a law of Trekosophy.
Let's do it. Yeah, maybe we'll just make that a law of life. Or Robin's
Okay.
Rules, 112, something like that. The plot of the episode was on the planet Beta 3. Kirk's crew beams down, and they find the population living in complete tranquility, with the exception of this annual festival, whereas it's this Dionysian pillage and plunder, and you wreck the joint. just live according to your passions for about 12 hours, and then everything goes back to normal, where they're calm, they're peaceful, they're serene. What I found interesting about this, the concept of the festival I thought was fascinating enough, but the population, the peaceful people, were called the body, and they were all subservient to the all-knowing, all-seeing, always present Landru, their head. And if you know anything about Paul's theology, blessed be the body and all of its parts, I felt like they were getting at Christianity. They were talking about Landru being gentle, who blessing all of us. And if you were to look at the greetings that they give one another, is contentment, fulfillment, peace, the absolute good, the highest good. They're always talking about Christian phrases. But the downside is they don't think. All of their thinking is done for them. As our librarian has pointed out to us, Landru tells you what to think. He tells you what to say. And they're not accustomed to a disruption of that peaceful lifestyle. So I thought that would foster some discussion for us with pseudo-Christian ideals coming into conflict with Kirk's crew. Does anyone want to add something to that? Did I overlook something that...
Well, I can quote one thing from Memory Alpha, and that this episode marks one of 4 times that Kirk is able to talk a computer to death. Skill is also used in The Changeling, iMud, and The Ultimate Computer, with an honorable mention going to What Are Little Girls Made Of?
Yeah. We'll have to talk about that too.
I need to watch that episode again. Does it actually answer the question?
Answer what
Sugar
question?
and spice and everything nice.
Yeah, there's no sugar or spice or anything nice in that episode.
But that's just a side point. Regarding your mention of how it's kind of poking fun. I don't know about poking fun, but it's alluding to Christianity in a roundabout way. Are you basically saying that the writers of the episode felt like Christianity has created a zombie-like culture of people who just blindly go forward with their faith and are, for the most part, stagnant?
You know, it might not be poking fun. It's definitely poking.
Yeah, that was my interpretation. I don't think it was a stretch to arrive at that. I mean, the terms were explicitly Christian. The analogies that they used, the body and the effects of being absorbed into the body, were the fruits of the spirit that Paul alludes to. So I don't think it was implicit, or I don't think it's an eisegesis. I think it's directly reading into what they were getting at.
And I don't think it's necessarily Christianity as it is right now. I think what it was going for was that Christian ideal, you know, the kingdom of heaven on earth, what heaven's going to be like, where everything is perfect and everything is bliss. And they probably leaned heaviest on the Christian utopian ideal, but I think the underlying message is that utopia kind of sucks.
Yeah.
That's a theme that comes up repeatedly in Star Trek.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's... Well, why don't we talk about that?
Isn't that a weird message for the original series to say? Because the original series is Roddenberry's vision of humanity as this, you know, best, you know, peak of perfection. And then he turns around with this anti-utopian deal.
Well, it's a Christian utopia. It's not a Roddenberryan scientific humanism utopia. It's
as I recall,
utopia.
Roddenberry was an atheist, was he not?
Yeah, he was.
He seemed more like a sort of pan-entheist some of the time.
I might be getting this confused with the end of the apple, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not. Spock talks about how we long for a society that's as peaceful as that, but we give it up because it slows our minds down. It prevents us from thinking. And I thought that might be an interesting template for a discussion on sociology versus philosophy. I find if you ask someone's opinion on Christianity, quite often they won't give you a philosophical opinion. They'll give you a sociological opinion, like, oh, it's reformed my life and it makes people better. Or, oh, I think it's just a way of oppressing poor people or something like this. And they won't talk about the truth of it. Instead, they'll talk about the effect that it has on society.
And
Oh
they
yeah,
very
C.S.
rarely-
Lewis hated that. C.S. Lewis is always ranting against that, really against sociology in general, but especially because of that particular consequence of sociology.
Bill, what were you saying?
I was going to say the irony is that just like the Landru's people, whether you love it or hate it, most people respond about Christianity without really thinking about it. It's the kind of thing they've already got their answer, so they're done. And that's kind of what the whole message behind it was, sort of the cautionary warning to the utopian ideal that Roddenberry presented was, yeah, we solved all of our problems, but that in itself creates a danger of a new problem where we get fat and lazy, which is why we need to be out there in space pushing the limits still, looking for new problems. You can't just live with perfection. You got to keep going. It's the only way to grow and evolve.
You need to
That's
challenge
the whole
yourself.
question of free will.
Ooh,
Well,
yes.
Free will is Landru's controlling the whole world for them. They're not striving to do anything themselves. They have no problems to solve themselves.
Absolutely.
This idea of a utopia that is fully collectivist, regarding everything as good and all that stuff, was explored in this thing I keep recommending to everybody on Facebook lately, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World from 1931. It's a novel that explores this society that has achieved its ideal of what it thinks of as perfection, but the people have become sort of dehumanized by their living in this sludge of sex, drugs, and insipid pop music, where they really have no real passion, no real understanding of what it's like to be a human being, as opposed to just being a sort of animal that has endorphins pumped through its brain all the time.
Well, can I draw that thought out a little bit?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Because one of the things I wanted to do was bring up Nietzsche's, in my view, it's his chief criticism of Christianity. And I think it plays out perfectly in this episode. I'll just read a passage here. It's one of my favorite of Nietzsche's books. It's a passage from Birth of Tragedy, and Nietzsche had sat down and he wrote a criticism of his own book some years after the fact, and this comes from his criticism of his own book. And what he's talking about is Christianity's aversion to passion or desire or appetites. And he draws this out a little bit in art in the chapter that I'm reading from. In truth, nothing could be more opposed to the purely aesthetic interpretation and justification of the world which are taught in this book than the Christian teaching. It negates, judges, and damns art, which he sees as a manifestation of our desires. Behind this mode of thought and valuation, which must be hostile to art if it is at all genuine, I never failed to sense a hostility to life, a furious, vengeful antipathy to life itself. Christianity was from the beginning, essentially and fundamentally, life's nausea and disgust with life, merely concealed behind, masked by, dressed up as faith in another or better life, hatred of the world, condemnation of the passions, fear of beauty and sensuality, beyond invented, the better to slander this life. All this always struck me, at the very least, a sign of abysmal sickness, weariness, discouragement, exhaustion, and the impoverishment of life. For confronted with morality, especially Christian or unconditional morality, i.e. Kantian morality, life must be continually and inevitably in the wrong. And that passage I thought applied so well for the episode because these people are constantly ignoring their desires until it erupts in a very unhealthy way. I just thought I'd add that to the discussion. If somebody had any thoughts they wanted to bounce around with that. No? Christianity.
It does kind of tie in with what Hillary mentioned about the suppression of free will. Now, I didn't see the whole thing, but isn't that part of why they have the red hour in the first place, to let go of the control so that the computer doesn't burn itself out by trying to hold on to so many people? Wasn't that what the red hour was?
Well,
letting that free will kick in to overdrive to make up for it being suppressed?
Yeah, it was. It was the eruption of desires, but in an unhealthy way.
I might suggest some parallels to. I think they're drawing upon Orwell's 1984 and the 3-minute hate in that red hour thing. The 3-minute hate is sort of the Ingsoc society, the Ingsoc culture's alternative to sex and passion of every kind, by hating these sort of imagined enemies of the state, this Emmanuel Goldstein figure. And it's supposed to sort of sate the animal part of man, without letting any sensitivity we might have left to natural law or to things we really ought to get enraged about, to become dangerous to the state by channeling it into these sort of designated safe sort of zone for it to happen in.
A bit like Pon Farr too.
Like what?
Pon Farr sort of
Pon
does
Farr.
that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I really don't think, though, that we're facing something like 1984.
Well, actually, I just now saw on here on Memory Alpha just why festival takes place or how frequently it occurs is never made entirely clear.
No, it's not. But I find something in Nietzsche's criticism that when you undergo such constant suppression, the desires are not treated with their proper respect, and there's bound to be something unhealthy in the psyche because of that.
I don't think we're facing 1984. I think we're facing something more like Brave New World.
Well, C.S. Lewis, I thought had an interesting illustration for the effect, where he talks about the sex appetite being somewhat perverse. If our appetite for food were such that we could go into a joint where we would be excited by having a little bit of a ham revealed to us slowly at a time, you'd say, okay, something's clearly gone wrong with the appetite here.
Yeah, and he's trying to respond to Nietzsche there. Or I thought you were going to leave it.
Well, no, I'm just trying to leave it open-ended, where clearly the festival's not the most healthy way of approaching your passions.
Well, hold on. You've got to give the rest of that passage.
Okay. Well, the rest of it is such that he says, okay, it could be a problem that the people are seriously deprived of food, or it could be that they're overindulged.
Right, and he says you've got to actually look at where the direction society's been heading in relation to the past. You've got to look at the sort of natural state of what is actually practicable compared to what we're actually doing, and then make a judgment which of those two things has gone wrong based on that analysis. And he thinks that without even introducing anything about Christian sexual morality, you can sort of get the idea that, you know what, our sex drive has perhaps gone wrong in some ways, because if every young man indulged his sexual appetite to the extent that he feels it, then every single male individual would populate a small village. And that seems a little bit out of control.
What was it? I remember an old saying that a man thinks about sex like 500 times a day or something crazy like that.
I don't know.
Well, it seems over the top, but could be. I think the point of the episode, though, is to say that the repression doesn't lead to a healthy outcome. And I don't know that that's a fair criticism of Christianity to suggest that it endorses repression. But I do agree with that sentiment.
Some some particular forms of Christianity certainly go overboard in that direction.
Yeah, I agree.
But then so do particular forms of perhaps most other systems.
Well, Buddhism does.
So is it a critique of Christianity or organized religion in general?
Well, I think Buddhism would be the most guilty in terms of the charge for repression of our desires.
Yeah, that's because that's what Buddhism's all about.
Suffering comes from desire, yeah.
I think that one could quite easily claim that Nietzsche is quite simply wrong from beginning to end as far as Christianity in general, and to prove this, you only need to look at our current society and all of these conservative Christians who are supposed to be so repressed. All you have to do is count the number of kids they have and just reflect on the fact that those kids were not dropped off by the stork.
Well,
I mean, this is an empirically falsifiable idea we're talking about here, and it seems to be blatantly counterfactual.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with your methodology there, that kid counting is the way to
that's a little inherently flawed.
Satisfaction. But it's not just sex. I mean, there's other desires too. There's a desire to be belligerent. There's a desire for money. There's a desire for alcohol. Like a whole slew of things that this would apply to.
Oh, there's the whole 7 deadly sins.
Exactly. I was going to bring that up.
Yeah. Well, okay. If somebody wanted to add more to that, we can. But if not, we can move on.
Or just a desire to be lazy, desire to overeat, all these things.
Well, yeah. I think there's a sense in which there's a sense in which I think this Nietzschean critique is entirely in the wrong direction. And that's because the emerging post-Christian culture that we're getting, which I think is heading in the direction of Brave New World, is one which not only rejects Christianity, but in which any system in which we could embrace this radical kind of passion or these radical subjectivities that Nietzsche is so fond of, or at least postmodern theorists are so fond of, becomes increasingly impossible or nonsensical or not. The people's level of the status of the individual has become beneath them. And this is illustrated in Brave New World by never or almost never referring to Christianity. The major character in Brave New World, John the Savage, is instead obsessed with Shakespeare. And Shakespeare in his day, you might remember, was criticized for his notions about love that challenged the status quo Christian notions, and really stood up against the whole idea of arranged marriage, and instead stood for the idea of this sort of romantic love as the basis for marriage, rather than things like trade or political favors or success prospects, those sorts of things. He instead championed this idea of romantic love as the basis for marriage. And so he was standing up against Christianity, or against the mainstream Christian culture in many ways in his day. But it becomes impossible to understand what the hell he's talking about. In a culture that has gotten rid of the whole concept of marriage entirely. All of these passionate scenes in Shakespeare, which are near and dear to the heart of Western culture, become completely nonsensical if we completely reject all notions of sexual morality and completely indulge our desires and lose the ability to conceive of the possibility of trying to discipline them in any way, which is the direction I think we're heading. So there's my rant.
Well, yeah, I think it's. I think you're right. I've heard it said communism depends on a notion of the family too. I mean, if you want to talk about universal brotherhood, you have to have a concept of your brother and what that means.
Oh yeah, communism is out. I mean, if you kill God in the Nietzschean sense, you haven't just killed the Christian God. You've killed a whole slew of rational structures. I mean, you've basically gotten rid of the whole concept of rational structure. And
well, I think that's what Nietzsche was really getting at.
There are much wider consequences than getting rid of Christianity there.
I think that's what Nietzsche was really getting at. Well, not really, but it wasn't an aside. He was attacking rationality in the Enlightenment and trying to usher in the Romantic era.
Okay, can either of you or both of you help a layman like me to understand what you're talking about?
Sure, yeah. The idea is you have the people on Beta 3 with Landru, and they're controlled by a computer,
right?
I.e., purely rational dictates. And they don't act according to their passions except for when it comes bubbling to the surface and it comes out in the unhealthy ways. But by and large, it's peaceful and they're controlled purely by a rational idea. Well, you've also got this concept of scientific rationalism and ideas of truth. And you want to find out truth and you want to learn more and more and more.
Okay.
This is the prevailing philosophy at the time when Nietzsche's writing. You have people who are infatuated with the goal of modernity. You have Hegel and Kant who really seem to be getting somewhere with their philosophy and actually arriving at something. You have scientists who are actually, the Newtonian scientists who are just figuring out more and more, and they really seem to be making a lot of progress in understanding the way the universe works. What Nietzsche was saying is that this doesn't work. And so if you're a new atheist type and you're an admirer of Nietzsche, you're essentially admiring somebody who's trying to attack your foundation, because Nietzsche's enemy wasn't Christianity, it was truth itself. And it wasn't necessarily, I shouldn't say it was truth itself, I think it was the attitude that we have towards truth. And he was trying to invite a different way of life where it wasn't controlled by something rational. It was instead controlled by the desires, the appetites. I mean, his the famous passage, life or desires are prior to reason. It's more fundamental to life than thought is. And so thinking about truth is well and good if you have some sort of a desire to do it, but it really shouldn't be that controlling of you. And so what Ben's talking about here, if I've understood you correctly, Ben, is that Nietzsche's actually undermining new atheism just as much as he's undermining Christianity with his God is dead statement.
Well, that's true. That's certainly what I was talking about earlier this week on Facebook, because I heard a new atheist say, that the death of God was inevitable because of the rise of science. I'm like, no, that is not what the death of God is about. So that's part of it. But it goes beyond the new atheists. I mean, I wouldn't it's more important than new atheism. It's not just new atheism and Christianity that are on the line here. It's all rational structures, or even structures that make an attempt at a semblance of rationality, like communism, right? Communism's gone too. I mean, everything is on the line here. The only thing that's left is Nietzsche's sort of, what's this radical self-redefinition that he wants, is really going to be the only thing left if we accept the whole idea of the death of God.
Well, let's talk about that under the context of the episode, because
right,
God
we do need
dead.
to bring it a bit down to earth, because I think we've really lost Chris and Bill.
Well, Landru died too.
Yeah.
And the reason why Landru died was because Kirk talked him into it, but he talked him into it based on Landru's values. So Christianity props up science and rationalism and concepts of truth, but the further we run with that, the more we think, okay, well, this isn't really what we find in Christianity. And so Nietzsche says Christianity gets undermined because of that. Well, Landru is looking out for the well-being of his people, but in doing so, he's created a culture that's, well, we're saying the term stagnant is loaded. Well, it's a stagnant culture where there's no creativity. It's pure rationalism. And so Landru, in trying to take care of the people, has actually hurt them. And if he tries to dismiss evil, something that would hurt his people, he'd get rid of Landru. It's the same thing in God is Dead. It's in promoting rationalism, you undermine the foundation for Christianity.
That so
whether Nietzsche was right or wrong, I'm just saying this was the thought. I don't agree with him, but that was the thought.
Okay, so you think that this is illustrating Nietzsche's attempting to illustrate Nietzsche's point with the myth of the death of God. So basically, you're saying that Return of the Archons is a retelling of Nietzsche's myth of the death of God. Basically, the thesis you're putting forward, Brandon, and I'm going to try and start a process of bringing this a bit down to earth, so the non-philosophy majors among us can grab hold of this more than they have been able to.
Yes, please. My ears are waxing up.
I'm going to do that, but first I just want to get a yes or no from Brandon just to make sure I've got his point clearly. Brandon, your thesis here is that the Return of the Archons is essentially a retelling of Nietzsche's myth of the death of God, whether we agree with it or not. Is that your point, Brandon?
Yeah, I think there's a definite parallel going on there.
Okay.
I think it's the exact same thought process.
Okay. Well, we obviously need to give an account of Nietzsche's myth of the death of God for everybody else. I might make some attempt at that.
Briefly.
Yeah, and I'm going to try to make it really brief. Nietzsche writes this as a sort of parable, and I'm not going to even attempt to talk about the surrounding story because I don't remember it. But the essential point of what Nietzsche says is, instead of, most classical atheism is the idea that God does not exist, right? It's the idea that there are exactly zero gods. All gods are fake. That's classical atheism. Whereas these new atheists are more agnostics. There's not enough evidence for God, But classical atheism is there is no God. Well, Nietzsche might happen to be a classical atheist, but in saying God is dead, which is the famous thing he's saying, he's not merely saying, he's not expressing a proposition like there is no God, which can be true or false. He's giving a sort of parable or myth. And what he says is that God is dead and we have killed him because we no longer really believe in him. And by God, he doesn't just mean the Christian God. He means that we no longer really believe in the claims to objective truth made by structures of rational thought, whether they are religious or governmental or philosophical or scientific or political. I already said political, or we don't really believe in any of these things. We're not really, and they have no longer been able to sort of animate human beings. They are dead. They're remnants of them are still around, but they're on their way out, and it's very hard to make it clear because Nietzsche never makes anything clear because he's attacking all rationality. So he never really makes anything clear. But there's all these different layers to it. But the myth of the death of God is basically a rejection of all rational systems of thought. That's probably as far as I should go. I'm starting to get on thin ice here because it gets to stuff it's hard to explain. Brandon probably know it better than I would.
But you do wind up with a paradox, and that's the thing that kills Landru. And the point was made with morality that the progenitor of the goodness became the evil. And that's the paradox that washed him away, that Kirk pointed out.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have? I mean, I've got. I think there were 2 questions there that I didn't get to. But was there anything else from the episode that somebody else wanted to bring up? Hillary, you were mentioning free will.
Yeah, well, the theme just seems to come up in this episode and others that there was the lack of free will, that there was one overarching entity that's controlling everything, and that we were meant to have free will and explore our own destinies. That seemed to come up in all the we were not meant for paradise themed episodes.
Mm-hmm.
We weren't meant for paradise because in order to get to paradise, we have to sacrifice ourselves and sacrificing our free will. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Or at least that's the way it comes out in the episodes.
Well, it sounds a heck of a lot like
yeah,
Genesis to me, too.
Well, I think the point with Genesis is that you had to have the tree there because without free will, there is no paradise. You had to freely choose. You had to freely choose.
Happy or to live short and know stuff.
Yeah.
I might say, the Garden of Eden story opens up a big old can of worms.
Okay, I'm sorry I brought it up.
Yeah. But I might say that I don't think it's an antithesis between happiness and knowledge in general. I am of the opinion that Adam, in his pre-fallen state, that is to say his original natural state, had access to just about all knowledge because he could walk and talk with God, except the knowledge of good and evil. So people are always saying it's the tree of knowledge. And that's not really what it is. It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And really, you can't have knowledge of good without having knowledge of evil. So Adam had good behavior, but he didn't have knowledge of good behavior because he had nothing to compare it against. So in a sense, it's really the tree of the knowledge of evil. And it's really that particular knowledge that it's about in my interpretation of the story.
Go ahead, Bill.
In Babylon 5, they went over the same kind of theme about free will versus paradise as one of their overarching story elements. I know some of you are still watching through it, but that was one of the themes. You had order and you had chaos. The agents of chaos said, we do promote war and evil because it's through strife and conflict that you get evolution and growth and improvement. And the good guys, side of order, we promote order because stick to the plan and everything's good for everybody and everybody's happy and content and safe. So Landru is an example of the extremes of order. It was a perfectly ordered world and a lot safer than anything you'd get under free will, where there is no plan and you can just do whatever you want willy-nilly.
Well, that gets to the whole dialectic of safeness. What does it really mean to be safe? if your money is so tightly locked up that even you can't get to it, how safe is it really?
True. Well, in this case, I mean, it was just a question of happiness, and everybody was happy. They had that goofy smile on their face.
Yeah, well, another issue there is, of course, the definition of happiness. Is happiness the same thing as pleasure, or are there perhaps some things more important than physical sorts of pleasure, or just feeling good? Where happiness, there's a sort of higher notion of happiness that involves more than just those sorts of concerns. The sort of happiness that John the Savage is looking for in Brave New World and never finds. So in the end, he commits suicide because that sort of happiness has vanished from the world in the novel.
If it
I
ever
really
existed.
recommend. Well, it did exist. He's got all these old books that tell him about it. That's how he knows about it.
Yeah, but I mean, I hate to, I always look at stuff like that and try to play devil's advocate. I know he kind of rejected the Brave New World, but at the same time, the Brave New World rejected him. They looked at him as a freak, a savage, a monstrosity, a throwback to more primitive times. And he didn't even really know what the happiness was he was looking for. He had this vague ideal that he'd found in these ancient books. It wasn't like something he used to have and then lost. He never had it. So he's
Yes, that's
basing it
true.
on something. I mean, did it really exist? Look at our modern world that those ancient books came from. That true happiness, that sublime thing he was looking for. The Brave New World had it, but it was a shallow, empty thing without substance, and that was what really did him in.
The Brave New World didn't have the kind of happiness that we're talking about. Different kinds of happiness here. The Brave New World did not have the kind of happiness that John was looking for.
Right, it had the only kind of happiness that there actually is. His ideal was unreachable.
You know what? I think if I believed that, I'd probably hang myself.
Which is what he did.
Yes, I think if he was right, if you're right, then he was right to hang himself.
I'm not necessarily saying I'm right. I don't think that kind of happiness is unreachable. I'm just saying that's what he thought.
Yes,
It
that is what he
wasn't that he
thought.
couldn't
That's why he
find
hung
it.
himself. I thought
And
you were
it's like-
saying though that it really doesn't exist. That he was right, and I don't think he was right.
Well, I think okay, my personal opinion and part of why I think he was wrong even though he was right, because I don't think the happiness itself matters. It's the looking for it. And that was Kirk's point. Because this society had it. They had that utopia. They had peace, and the whole world was full of dead people.
They didn't have the kind of happiness John was looking for. They had the kind of happiness that the Brave New World had.
They had something in between the two. It was a world without strife. It was a world where everything was ordered, everything was peaceful, everything was calm, everything was following the plan.
That's Brave New World. That's not John.
But it doesn't. But that's just it. The real happiness, the unattained, the point Kirk was making was not that there's a real kind of happiness you can get. It's that you need to be unhappy. Unhappiness is better than happiness because you get growth, you get change, you get all that other good stuff
Then they
thrown
bring
in
up
there.
the importance in pain in Star Trek 5.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, you need. Yeah, and I actually used that quote when talking about Brave New World. Sometimes also I'll just link that scene from Star Trek 5, because the higher kind of happiness or fulfillment that John is looking for necessitates unhappiness or pain.
And
Right?
that's why I'm thinking there was something wrong with John's outlook, because I don't know, it just seems like he was going down a dead-end alley to begin with. He was looking for the wrong thing instead of appreciating the trip along the way. You're never going to get to that kind of happiness ideal that he visualized. He's never going to reach it, so he quit trying.
Well, I think with Hillary's
sorry.
point, I mean, you need the pain. Genesis requires a tree. And Kirk just didn't see that in Beta 3 with Landru. I think that's the point. Yeah, I think you're onto something, Bill. It's the struggle just as much as it is the attainment, because if you didn't struggle for it, well, you didn't really attain it.
Right. And it's the kind of struggle that never actually ends, because, I mean, Landru wasn't imposed on these people. It wasn't like they were... I mean, the society itself created a dude named Landru who built this computer because the society said, we want this kind of perfect order. We want this kind of thing. And he gave them what they weren't really innocent victims. They were self-inflicted, if that makes sense. Or am I rambling again?
Well, I think that had been there several generations, so the first generation might have had some guilt, but the succeeding generations didn't.
Yeah, and I mean, Kirk's crew they attempted to absorb them. I kind of wanted to make the point about evangelism too, but I guess we're running out of time, so maybe we'll have to...
Maybe we should make this a two-parter, because actually this is important Trekosophy stuff here.
Well,
I think we
talk
should just
about... Go ahead,
give
Bill.
it 6 months and come back to it. I don't think we should do too many two-parters. We're going crazy with those.
I wanted to talk about the Apple as well. It was another TOS episode which
deals with the same issues.
Maybe we should talk about those on that episode of Trekosophy then.
Yeah. Like I say, it's Kirk's destroyed 4 computers by talking them into doing it. Now, can I make the obvious joke? It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. And with a computer that can process so fast, Captain Kirk's dialogue is more painful than what I'm doing to you now. Okay, I'm done.
I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
Okay,
that
Gilbert
seems
Gottfried
most logical, Captain.
There you go. Gilbert Gottfried could have shut down that computer in half the time. And once again, our faithful band of Archons will be leaving. But don't you worry, kids. We will return soon with another exciting episode. I would like to thank everybody for showing up, and I would especially like to thank Hillary for showing up because, dagnabbit, consarnate, we need her. She's got the awesome NPR voice, and 3/4 of the newer topics you're going to be hearing from us over the next few weeks are ideas she had. So, hip hip hooray and all that. Anyway.
This is hip hip.
Hooray!
Hooray!
Hip hip. Hooray.
Hooray!
Hip hip.
Hooray!
Hell yeah!
Hooray!
Okay.
Most
All right,
illogical.
so, thanks for listening. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter. Those of us that didn't talk our computers into self-destructing will join you next week for another exciting episode.
And remember, a gram is better than a dam.
I just wanted to wish you all peace, joy, and tranquility. Blessed be the body.
Yes. Joy to you, friends.
And also to you.
Yeah, well, Chris.
Yeah.
Don't put that in the show. You might keep like an archive of it.
You're gonna have to ask real nicely.
Is everybody still here? Hillary is still with us?
Yep. Still here.
Yay!
You bet your
Brandon.
ass I'm still here.
Kirby likes to bet people's asses.
I'm not a gambler,
love-
and if I was, I probably wouldn't bet that.
Ben, you put your ass on the table right now, son.
Whoa.
No, I think I'll cash out.
Okay, pause for one moment here. We're having trouble with Ben, it looks like.
Oh, big deal.
Yes, Ben, you and I have Good, Mike. Now, the next person to get one should be Bill, because we've got to hear what his golden tones sound like over a really good mic.
Yeah, and then you find out my tones aren't quite that golden after all. It's more cheap brass.
I'm going to try and contradict everything any of you guys say about any fact about the whole Star Trek universe.
What? Fans getting angry? No, that would never happen.
Stop running this script. A script is causing Internet Explorer to run slowly.
You're running Internet Explorer.
No. I'm running Skype, and the HTML elements that are embedded in Skype use Internet Explorer to embed the HTML.
Wow.
So Skype actually utilizes Internet Explorer.
Wait.
So I'm not sure if I click yes, that might mean that I might quit having this problem with the CPU. But that might cause problems with Skype. If I click no, then I might start skipping out because the CPU is overloaded. So this is like, what a decision. There ought to have a button for tell the developers they're idiots. I'll just click yes.
Thank you for listening. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter.
Whoa.
You guys still there?
Whoa.
Whoa.
Flying dog attack. Sorry about that. Everything
Wow.
okay?
There's an image.
I'm just
Puppy was
picture
excited to
Puppy
see me. Comes tear it.
with a
Yeah.
Superman cape on, leaping into the air at your face.
Kind of awfully close to
Coraline.
that. That's pretty much what happens. She jumps up to say hello. She jumped down to say hello. She got tangled in the microphone and pulled everything kind of lopsided. She's okay. I'm not entirely sure about my computer because it's sideways now. Anyway.
My self-sacrifice, Chris, you have and always shall be. Trekosophy out of danger.
God help us all.
You can take the lead of this conversation for sure, Brandon. I mean, it's your episode.
Oh dear. Didn't bring that many notes.
Yeah, see, in the North, they don't have Nintendos. They have Ataris.
Oh, it all makes sense now. That explains so many things.
Did you guys know Super Nintendo is closer to the moon landing than it is to today chronologically?
Yeah, it frightens me on so many levels.
Thanks for making me feel old.
You're welcome.
Actually, in the end, Kirk dies and Spock saves him.
Oh, bummer.
I just made that up.
No, R2, you cannot go there.
You know, war games taught us the undeniable fundamental principle of computer science that the really important process-intensive tasks will be kept track of on the really big monitors, while the less important, less processor-intensive tasks will be on the smaller monitors.
Huh.
And I'm sorry, I can't call it Whopper. A Whopper is a burger. That computer was Joshua.
Yeah, like I had a whole zoo looking at my essay at one point.